Hey guys, just wanting to go over some notes with you about this week's assignments that we have going on September 14th through the 18th. So this week we are focusing on not only characterization still in things that we read, but also types of conflicts. So there's going to be a couple assignments this week and next week that go over what type of conflict was occurring in the short stories that you're going to go over. And so the types of conflict typically are, well, conflict as we know it in literature is any type of struggle. Any type of struggle is considered a conflict. So that could be between man versus himself, which is like an internal struggle. You know, your character is struggling with emotions or thoughts going on inside his head, whether or not he should lie to help his friend out or tell the truth because he knows that's what's right. Those kind of internal struggles and things that our characters oftentimes face. Another type of conflict is man versus man. And that's your typical superhero movie where, you have one character physically fighting another one. Harry Potter and Voldemort, for example, if you're a Harry Potter fan. And so this is your physical, it happens between two or more characters within your story. Another type of conflict is man versus nature. This, in many times in stories, has to do with your character handling some form of natural disaster. So whether it be things like a tornado or out in the wilderness, they run into a wild animal like a bear or anything. This is also your like utopia, dystopia type stories and things like that, where they're dealing with like the end times and post-apocalyptic eras, and they're having to deal with many struggles, but oftentimes those are brought on because a meteor hit Earth or whatever the case may be. So that would be a man versus nature type of conflict in there. Another type of conflict is man versus society. This is also considered an external conflict as well. This is when a character feels like they need to fight against society's rules or standards. You see this a lot of times in your utopia, dystopian stories where they have a set way that they have always done things or that their village is run, but the character is fighting against it, such as like Katniss did. In Hunger Games and stuff like that. So this is their plight or their fight for freedom. That's considered a external conflict. Your man versus nature is also external conflict. Your man versus man is external conflict. Your internal conflict is man versus himself. Thoughts, emotions, things like that. In these short stories or in any story you read or movie that you see, there's oftentimes more than just one conflict. Conflict makes for the drama, it makes for the story, it makes things very interesting. So there's oftentimes more than just one conflict going on, especially with your main character. Usually some type of internal struggle plus man versus man struggle or man versus nature struggle. Very common. So just be aware of those. In your notes in your module, you will see a little sheet that I made for you, little notes to help you out when conflict questions arise this week. And then I'll make sure I attach the notes again for next week on any conflict type assignments that you have to do. Also, this week we are going over continuing to go over characterization. And so this week we're going over a graphic organizer or a chart that you fill in as you are learning and diving more into a character in a story. So it's called STEAL, STEAL, and this will also be in your module for you to look at. You're also going to have one to fill out towards the end of the week regarding one of your short stories. It'll look like this, okay? And the acronym STEAL is the 5 elements of characterization when you begin to dive into your character. So the S stands for speak. So this is anything that your character says, or their tone, or how they speak to others. That tells you a lot about your character. It tells us a lot about people, right? How they speak, what their tone is like, how they present themselves. So S stands for speak. And so when you are diving into your character, the way that character speaks, the tone that they speak with, how they're treating others, verbally and things like that, tell us a lot about them. So that helps develop the character. Your next letter is T. T has to do with their thoughts. So sticking to that same character that you've chosen to dive into. These are, what does your character think, believe, or value in your story? So going back and thinking about your character, even though if it doesn't tell them specifically, I think this or I value this, you can tell by a character's actions what their motives are. So going back and diving into your character, you should be able to write down their thoughts. What does your character value? What motivates them in the story? What are their beliefs and things like that? The next letter you have is E, and that is effects. What effect does your character have on others? Most stories, your character will always affect others in some way, shape, or form because of their actions. So you're going to go back and you're going to look at the relationships that the character has with others. How did they treat each other? How does your character treat other people? What type of relationships does your character have? That tells a lot about your character. It tells a lot about somebody's personality in real life. So it's going to tell a lot about your character in a story. Your next letter, is A in the acronym of STEAL, and A stands for actions. So this is, how does your character behave? How did your character behave through the whole story? What actions did they take? How do they react sometimes to other people? Your reactions and actions in real life say a lot about you. And so obviously in a story, fictional or otherwise, your actions the character's actions are going to say a lot about that character. So make sure that, you pay attention to that when you're trying to define who your main character is in the story or anything like that. Your last letter in the acronym for STEAL is L, and L is for looks. While your stories may not specifically tell you the main character looks like blah, 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 it may not come directly out and say that, but there are other ways that kind of how your character looks, or their physical appearance, or how they present themselves, or if they're always tired, or if they're frumpy, or if they spend 2 hours getting ready every morning. I mean, little details like that is what's considered with looks. This tells a lot about your character. Their body language throughout the story and stuff like that will tell you a lot about your character as well. Are they uptight? Are they kind of lazy? Are they always, dressed to impress? Are they, more dark and depressive? Stories will lead on to kind of the looks that your character has and how they present themselves. And that helps us determine even more about that character, especially as we create it in our heads as we're reading along. We get more of a shared picture of what this character would look like, and which is exactly how they take stories in a book and then put it into a movie form. Is all by characterization. The author has done such a good job at creating these characters that we all kind of have a similar view, not exact, but a similar view of how these characters should look. And then when it turns into a movie, oftentimes those characters should replicate kind of what you had in your head. Not every movie does a great job with that, as we know, but that's the goal anyways, through characterization. So when you get to this graphic organizer in your module this week, you'll have all this information up here, so you don't have to remember it from a video. And then all you'll have to do is tell me that speaker's that characters, words that are said or anything that they've spoken in that story, their thoughts, their effects on others, their actions, and their looks, and how does this all come together to create that one character in this story. So that is your steel graphic organizer that you're going to be using this week and need to become familiar with. You may as well use it next week as we dive even further into characters of a story and conflicts that we see. If you guys have any questions, make sure you email me anytime. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Otherwise, have a great week.